Kick off our mid-year check-in for the city budget of 2021 to 2022. Up front, we have John Carlson and Sherry Wolf, and we'll go ahead and turn the reins over to you all.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. Thank you for having us here this afternoon. We've got Sherry Wolf, our city budget officer, here with us today, and we've got lots of folks from the city team available to help pitch in to talk about stuff and available to answer questions. We appreciate the chance to come down and have a little bit of a conversation with you about city budget. We're always happy to talk about the city budget and remind the community that the city budget is how that we all work together to listen to the things that they're interested in, the things they want and need for their community, and then we translate that into the revenues they provide, into the services and the programs and the infrastructure updates that they want. So it's always nice to have a chance to check in with them in general, but particularly today, because we kind of have our new process in place. So we got an agenda for today, trying to accomplish basically four major sections here. And although we'll be doing some of the presenting up here, our thoughts is that the process is informal and meant to be conversational. So please feel free to speak up, ask questions, ask for clarifications today. And then certainly our goal is to provide a general level of detail on the check-in to lift up items of interest or concern that we think illustrate some of the trends that we see happening in the budget and things we're thinking about for the potential for the next budget. We know that you'll have additional questions. Things will come up that we'll need to get you additional information for. We have budget staff taking notes on any questions that come up, and we'll be happy to continue to get additional information and additional meetings as we need as we move through. So the first thing we want to do is do a little reminder for the public about the budget process and the calendar. Sherry and I were kind of laughing the other day. It's hard to believe. I mean, it's been over 6 months since we approved the last budget together. We're sitting in the room next door. Time certainly seems to fly by. A lot of good work has happened since then. But we wanted to start by thanking you all for updating the budget process to include this new mid-year check-in at this particular time. As you know, but the public may not remember, previously the budget office was supposed to provide you some sort of an update in January, and that never really provided an opportunity to give you good trends and good information since the fiscal year had just barely started. There really wasn't a lot of information to establish. So the update that you provided gives us a chance now to check in at a time when we've had a full 6 months go by. We can identify some trends and some issues and do a more full report in on what we're seeing. So the calendar that I've got thrown up on the screen right now is just a reminder that the fiscal year for the city runs September 1st to August 31st. So kind of September to September is our fiscal year. So we're 6 months, a little bit beyond 6 months through that. Today is Monday, April 11th, and we're doing the mid-year budget check-in. And the rest of it is just to sort of illustrate to folks that are watching. In terms of the check-in, we're halfway through as far as the look back, but in terms of the preparation and the look forward, we're way, way early. So we're on the front end of that. So when we get to that section in the conversation, we'll be talking conceptually, we'll be talking about ideas, all of that, though plenty of time to continue to do the work together to then move us into the summer later on in a couple months to continue working on the actual next budget that will come up. So that's kind of the calendar part. So we'll move on to our mid-year check-in. And so we sent you the report last Friday. We don't assume that you've had time to dig deeply into it, and our intention certainly is not to go through line by line. We certainly can meet individually with you on that if you want to actually do something like that. Instead, today, as I said before, we're going to try and lift up some of the trends and the issues. I will point out it's our first time providing the mid-year report, so ask for your grace on that. We may have too much, we may have too little. Whatever it is, we'll look forward to the conversation and the feedback, and we'll continue to fine-tune to make sure that we're giving you the things that you need in the kind of time space that you need. So with that, we'll jump into it with the headline. Big picture overall, we're on track. At mid-year, February 28, 2022, city budget operations are on track. And what do we mean by on track? We mean that overall revenues are above the budgeted amount or on track, and expenditures are at or below the budgeted amount overall. So the headline for today is that city budget operations are on track. That's good news. Thank you. And let's dig into what we mean by that a little bit with revenues and expenditures. We'll start on the revenue side. Just a reminder to the public, the revenues that fund the budget investments that we're able to make, they come from three different sections. Two big primary sources would be the sales tax and the property tax. And so we'll take a look at those and a little bit about what we've seen with those, where those trends have gone, and where we expect those trends to head in the future. So starting with sales tax. I mean, the good news here is that we continue to make smart investments and our economy continues to grow. This is a 16-year sales tax trend. You can see that Lincoln really does enjoy a remarkably steady growth rate over time. We're lucky with the partnerships that we have, the public and private partnerships that we encourage here in this community. And you don't see booms and busts in Lincoln. So you see slow, steady growth over time. But the interesting thing here, which you probably already caught out, is we want to draw people's attention to this. That movement off the trend line is interesting, and that's something that we want to take a minute to focus on. So on this next slide, let me zoom in a bit.
Nice.
So the question is, what's influencing sales tax off the trend line? You can probably answer this question yourself, but the fact of the matter is, it's pandemic purchasing and it's the federal stimulus that have influenced those sales tax receipts. That's not a criticism, that's actually an indication that it was doing exactly what it was intended to do. So in order to cope with the pandemic, people obviously needed to purchase PPE, they needed to purchase sanitizers, they needed to purchase different materials to change their business operations to continue to operate safely and healthfully. And in addition to that, obviously, the federal monies needed to come in and help continue to provide fuel for the economic engine, not only in Lincoln, but across the country. And so it did exactly what it was supposed to do in terms of providing resources for people to deal with the pandemic, and in order to provide capital to make sure that the economic engine was able to continue to move through. But clearly, as we analyze this, looking going forward, that type of stimulus bubble is not likely to continue, right? We're lucky enough to have managed the situation where the pandemic is concerned, the economy is doing what it's doing. In addition to that, then we start looking forward to the trends that we might expect to see during the rest of this budget year and some of the things on the horizon. And there's a bit of economic uncertainty, as you might say. There's global economic uncertainty, there's increasing fuel prices, war in Ukraine. The things that we see not only is that the absence of the kind of off-the-trend economic input, but it's these other kind of global situations that make us want to think that we need to be processing all that when we're projecting where we're likely to go. And what we think is, as we project that, we should be flattening that curve back to the trend line, right? So instead of assuming that there'll be that continued federal stimulus bubble, we should get ourselves back to where the normal 16-year trend line is. That extraordinary movement off the trend line is not likely to continue. And as we make that analysis internally based on the factors that we see here, we're certainly not alone in that. We see confirmation across the country and across Nebraska. Everyone basically making the same determination, which is good. We want that kind of confirmation. Overall, the notion is be prudent, be conservative, be safe in your projections as you're starting to think about the next year's budget and what kind of a box do we want to build in order to decide what are the resources that are going to be available to continue to invest in the community. So overall, on sales tax, we have seen that movement off the trend line, but we understand that's not likely to continue. We ought to set a conservative trend line. We'll remind the public that any surplus that would come in above that trend line that we set automatically goes into reserves, into the rainy day fund. Council continues to get monthly reports on all those collections, and the budget office continues to monitor all that progress during the next 6 months as we continue to move closer to projecting an actual number for the next budget year and what might be available. So a little bit on sales tax and where we think that is and where we think that's headed.
Councilman Beckius?
Yeah.
John, just a quick question before we move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate, listening to what you said, but then looking at the modeling that we have before us, do you anticipate that the sales tax will start to trend down until we get to that trending line? Or are you anticipating that it will continue to grow from the $90 million mark forward?
Right, so, and it's an interesting question to ask. So if we set a trend line that's doing year over year, then you would see it decline because you can't expect a 10% increase to continue if you see a 3% increase. So it would decline from that. So I'm answering both ways.
Okay.
So
I just want to understand.
Yeah, the year over year certainly will not continue at a 10% pace.
Sure.
We'll see that. But we do anticipate that we'll see modest growth, but certainly
Continuing.
just not
Okay.
the significant growth we've seen in the past.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So you're saying probably the funds that we've collected this year,
Right.
10%, let's say, over and above, we won't lose those funds. It
Right.
won't drop below that line.
That's right.
Yeah, compared to budget.
Right. That's absolutely right. Yep. So I'm popping back, talk a little bit about property tax in the same vein. Property tax is similar, but it doesn't have the fluctuations that you would see on sales tax. Here in trying to identify, well, before I get started there, let me just remind people watching, when we talk about property tax, we're talking about the city property tax, which is the blue wedge here. It's 16% of the overall property tax bill that they pay. We'd just like to point that out to folks. Because, and especially with our team here, I never want to miss an opportunity to congratulate our team because I think they do a lot with the funds that are provided. In return for that, 24/7 police and fire, streets, sidewalks, parks, playgrounds, libraries, all the things that are provided for the community are funded by these investments that the community provides. So when we talk about property tax, oftentimes we'll use permits as a proxy for activity. Right? So what this chart here is showing year-to-date total permit, commercial and residential, again, over a trend line, trying to show that movement. This one has a shorter trend line, so you'll see more movement of up over and above and below the trend line. But also notice the numbers that, although it looks like a significant move up and down, the numbers are pretty close together. So really, even if you see what appears to be a decline in 2022, that data point is still almost as high as it's ever been historically. So there still is that trend line. If you follow that trend line up and down, it's still a solid growth, what we see in the investment development.
These are just permits, right?
Right, yep. And there again, it's a great point.
Residential permits, commercial permits?
Both, it's the combined.
Okay.
Residential and commercial combined. And then, so that we basically have property taxes coming in, they'll lag that new construction, but also a reminder to the public that unlike sales tax that has collections that are delivered every month, property tax gets paid in April and in August to the county treasurer, and then that comes in. But the good news about that is you have a solid notion of where those funds are gonna be. City Council has set a tax rate, it's based on the property valuations, and that money comes in, and the only variance would occasionally be due to a very small delinquency rate if people are late in making their payments, but that's historically very, very small. So what influences the property tax revenue for folks watching at home? Well, there are three factors that we want to just lift up right now. Certainly new growth that we see in the community. We want to continue to build a community where people want to come, and they want to buy a new house, build a new house, they want to buy a new business, build a new business. That new growth expands the tax base, and then those property taxes that come off that expanded growth help pay for the services that those new homes and businesses need. We also continue to see expansion and improvements to existing properties, equally good. We want people that are here to stay here, make their investments, and to grow their families and their businesses here. And then certainly the third check mark, there's county assessors required by the state, as they will point out, to do periodic revaluations to recognize market values. And so we take those factors into consideration as we try and imagine where we think we're going to see and what we ought to be creating for that same type of a context in terms of building the budget. So our analysis so far has got us starting to think that we're likely to see the same trend line growth in the first year, 22-23. It's basically like a 3% growth of property tax base evaluations. And then that cyclical reevaluation is probably likely, since we're doing a biennial budget, we have to plan not only for the first year, but what's likely to happen in the second year. And if you look at those cycles, there's likely to be a reevaluation of some kind in the second year, so we've done a modest 5% in the second year. So as we start to set this framework for what revenues might be available, that's kind of the context that we're working in, 3% first year, 5% second year, based on the trend line. So that's a little bit about the two major revenues that we see. Occupation tax fees and other revenues obviously provide significant revenue too, but they all work together. So our return to the pie chart we see on the left is the one that we started with, the revenues that come in. Then obviously it has a one-to-one relationship with the pie chart on the right, which is what do we do with those revenues that the community provides? How do we translate that into programs, infrastructure, and services to build the community that they want? That's my little segue into talking about the report that we just sent you. So let's do a little bit of a discussion about the mid-year check-in and how those revenues are being used. So this is too small to see, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but I just bring it up as an example. So we've created the mid-year check-in report to sort of do a snapshot review of the budget investments across departments. And here again, I want to give a lot of credit to Sherry and the budget team. Frankly, it's a little bit of an art determining what data sets and what information work together to provide you a good representation of those trends and issues. You can slice it and dice it a lot of different ways. But again, it's our first go at it, and we'll continue to refine it as you need it. So if you want deeper breakdowns or other kinds of breakdowns, we can provide you to those in the future too. Since it's our first report, let me go through just a couple of slides to help explain the formatting and some of the terms that are in the report that help us with an understanding of it. So things to note about operating budgets that are reflected in the report. Some of these are obvious. We'll just kind of move through them so that people watching understand what we're talking about. But clearly, operations and budgets are affected by the seasons in Nebraska. So when you look through the report, Parks is a great example. When you look at the report and you say, Parks hasn't spent 50% of their personnel budget because, as you can guess, they haven't hired lifeguards and they haven't hired landscapers and they haven't hired the seasonal workers that they'll hire in quarter 3 and quarter 4 of the year. So you'll see that that's a natural seasonal impact. Other departments are similar to that. LTU, any department that has a construction interface. Certainly we have some construction in the fall or the winter time, but you're going to see the predominant amount of that happen in the second half of the season. So operational budgets in the report you'll see are sometimes affected by the fact that it's just seasonal. You'll see a category in the report for other services and charges. I like to think about that just as the overhead. So each department has overhead charges they have to pay. Again, as you know, all the departments, they pay a rent and a utility charge to the Public Building Commission based on square footage. So big departments pay more, smaller departments pay less. It's basically the rent that they pay that helps maintain the building and pay for the utility charges. Departments also pay an allocated share of city risk management and insurance charges. They pay a set of charges for information services and the technology support that they get, human resources and hiring support that they get, law department, all those other department services. So when you see other services and charges, you can just sort of think overhead in that. One other thing that's in that section, though, is service contracts. So you'll also see service contracts in the other services and charges section. And Sherry provided me a good example for that. In the finance department, for example, the Keno fund has an other services and charges payout because a certain part of the Keno, correct me if I get it wrong, a certain part of the Keno goes to human services. Well, the human services is performed by the county and by the state. So we have contracts with the county and the state, and those service contracts then that we pay them to perform the human services functions for our city are accounted for in other services and charges. So overhead, service contracts, that's what you'll see in those sections. Materials, supplies, and equipment is kind of another version. It's not seasonally impacted, but as you might expect, it doesn't always happen 1/12 every month as you go through the year. You may buy 4 computers because you need them at the beginning of the year. You may buy 4 computers because you need them at the end of the year. So you notice those fluctuations over time as people move forward. I'm going to invite Pat from Library to come up. They have an interesting one that kind of explains how their Keno revenue comes in and how it gets used at different times of the year for different things, just to give another person a chance to talk beyond the John show.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
So farther into your report is information about the library's expenses so far, breaking down the operational budget from the Keno budget. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about the Keno portions of our expenditures so far because their overall expenditure at the end of February was at 14%. We use our Keno funds for 2 basic purposes. One is to purchase technology to update our computers and all the peripherals, both for staff and public use. And then also that's where we spend quite a bit of money on what we call media, but that's books, magazines, CDs, downloadable materials, things that people check out. So we don't pay for any ongoing personnel or utilities or that kind of thing from Keno. A few of the things that are going on for us then is that as we look at the full fiscal year, we start off the year with a pretty healthy amount in our operational budget fund because August and April are property tax season, so we typically have that money to spend first. Keno comes in on a month-by-month basis, so we don't have that at quite the same amount at the start of the year. Then thinking about some of those things that we purchase from Keno, for instance, several of our technology orders right now are on back order because of the supply chain disruptions. So this year especially, we're waiting on some of those. It's been the same with our media orders, and it's been a frustration for our selectors that we think we're getting an item and for whatever reason it's not available because of those disruptions. And then the other thing I would just note is that In buying books, of course, we have to buy throughout the year because publishing happens throughout the year. So we have to make sure that we have money in August for the things that will be available at that time. And of course, the other impact is that certain things that we pay for annually. We have an annual contract for the magazines that we buy. That comes later in the year. We have an annual payment for some of the electronic information resources that we call databases. And those are due later in the year as well. So in many ways, I think these are some of the things that you would expect in terms of how a department spends its funds. And then I'd also note that when it comes to the capital outlay expenses, when you combine the library's operational and Keno, it's about 42% for that. So we feel like that's on target for what we know we're expecting later in the year in order to make sure that we're buying what customers want in terms of both of those areas, both the technology and the selection of materials for checkout. Any questions regarding that? All right, John, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you all.
Yep. So again, you'll see examples of that across all different departments, not unexpected, as you know, all business professionals, and you've seen that as examples in these arenas in which you run. You may notice during the budget that there are the departments are empowered and actually encouraged to find efficiencies and savings over the course of their fiscal year. And if they do, they often carry over those small savings to potentially handle one-time costs in the subsequent year. So a really common example is that they may have carryover available to help with the employee who retires and whatever their sick time bank, for example, payout might be. Someone works for the city a long time, they don't get all their sick time used out, they have their sick time bank, they're able to cash out a portion of that when they retire. And departments don't typically budget for that since it happens sporadically, but that carryover savings becomes a pool that they're able to use that for. I raise it up because you might notice in the budget, there may be one where there's not an item appropriated and somehow that somebody paid out an amount in that year. We certainly can find the specifics on that, but oftentimes that's the circumstances. They're able to pay out a small amount based on the savings from a previous year. Sometimes, though, it's actually a multi-year, really putting together multiple years of funding in order to make a significantly big purchase. And you'll see that in transportation utilities. Another really common example would be a fire truck, for example. Fire truck's roughly $1.5 million. You might see, well, you would see a $500,000 appropriation in one year, $500,000 appropriation in the next year, and in the third year you'd see only a $500,000 appropriation, but a $1.5 million expenditure. They've used multiple budget years to purchase a big piece of equipment. Grants and aid that you'll see in the report, it's just grants. They get them from federal, state, other grant sources. Public safety and health in particular get significant grants and aid funding. We're all familiar with the COPS funding to hire police officers and the SAFER grants to hire firefighters. I looked up those two as examples because they're ones where we will also have a local funding match. And then the local funding match is a good example of when you might see a transfer out. So a transfer out on the report basically just means that one fund was moved from one to the other, or multiple funds were combined in order to pay out for something. So in this circumstance, we'd have the federal funds coming in grants and aid, and then we would transfer them out into the fund. They would come in, and our local monies would transfer out to match up with those grant funds, so we could show the federal government that we've made the local match, and then we hired the police officers and the firefighters. So it's an accounting activity. It's how we track things across multiple departments. Happens everywhere in the system, and when a funding from more than one fund account gets used. So that's a little bit of me reading the dictionary to you, but I do think it's nice to know how these terms work as you start to look through. And again, happy to talk about any more of those in the particular whenever we need to. But with that, I want to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into the trends and issues that we think the report reveals to us, and invite some departments up to help us talk a little bit more about that. So trends and issues over the first 6 months. I was going to ask David Carey to maybe pop up here, and I've got some trends and issues we're going to talk through, and some of them I can describe, and some of them I'll ask some of our directors to help. But ask David to talk a little bit about what we're seeing with building and development over the first half of the year.
Thanks, John. So what we wanted to let you know about as a little snapshot into where we're at for this year is that our applications are actually up 15% through the first now 7 months. That's a 7-month figure compared to last year. That's significant because last year was a very high year for applications as well. So we are trending to have over 500 applications this year, which has only happened one other time in my history here. I believe that's the only time it's ever happened, back in 2017. So we're talking about a very active year. That follows up on our building from last year. Our permits pulled for residential was nearly 2,300, which is the fourth highest since 1960 and is certainly the highest we've seen in the last 18 years. So the market, I would say the market is responding to the demand. And the good news that's embedded in all of this is that our new comprehensive plan that we just adopted last year is in place now. That actually has a 48-year supply of potential lots based on our expected density and the amount of land that's been put into the plan now. So we're in a good spot as far as the plan is concerned moving forward and meeting the demand of what's happening right now. So strong trend, I would say about a 3-year trend now of very busy applications as well as building. So with that, I can answer any questions you might have about that.
Would we call that the David Carey effect? Is that what you're saying?
Probably not.
Okay.
Carry quotient.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
One quick question, what's an application?
Good question. So the applications are pretty much any application that comes in. So everything from an administrative amendment to an existing plan to a full-blown new use permit for new development that is on the edge that has 1,000 units in it. So it is all of those in between as well. So change of zone, but every single one of those has a process that it goes through, and so we track all of them.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
No, I was thumbs up in Murray's questions.
So if you got one little amendment to something that's on this application.
I did a remodel.
And then say you're in this quarter to
Build a deck, I got building.
Shed.
Well, they're applications to planning, not necessarily building permits.
Not building permits.
Not building permits, planning and application.
Planning. So a remodel doesn't happen as a planning.
It's a whole difference in
If you want a sidewalk.
Is there a clarification that the council wants from Director Carey?
No.
No.
No,
sure?
we're yakking. so-
Okay, because it seemed like as soon as he left, there was like 5 questions that popped up, so we're good? All right, thank you. Director Elliott?
This time, it's probably not quite as positive as David's, but we are starting to see some price increases for some of a lot of our supplies and resources. One of those impacting StarTran fuel, the diesel fuel is starting to go up. We are looking at, so from September 1 of 2021 to January of 2022, we used approximately 64,000 units of diesel. The price was $241 a unit in the beginning, and we are now at $417 a unit. So we're seeing an increase of about 112,000, a little over 112,000 in our diesel fuel. So that's one of the areas that we're seeing. Our chemicals for our utility side are the chemicals that we use to clean and treat both water and wastewater. We're also seeing anywhere from a 16 to a 30% increase for our chemicals there. And PVC, petroleum based, we're seeing upwards of a 120% increase on our PVC. That has had a direct impact on one of our projects out on West A. We received only 2 bids for our Phase 2 West A project. Our engineer's estimate was $2.5 million for that project. The awarded bid was $5.2 million for that project. So that's had a direct impact on a recent one. We did go ahead and are awarding that. We do need to move forward. We've got the utilities going in this construction season with streets following next construction season. You've probably seen them out there already doing some groundwork and tree removal for that. So that is a project that we want to keep on schedule, and we will keep on schedule for that. The other thing that we are seeing is with Lincoln on the Move. So we've seen a steady increase of cost per lane mile for our residential projects. In 2020, it was $195,000 per lane mile. In 2021, it was $239,000. And then here in 2022, we are up to $353,000. So I don't have the math in my head, But basically 200,000 up to 350,000 is kind of the increase we've seen in the last 2 years. So that is starting to impact us. But on some positive side of things, because things are moving, we are continuing to see, we are investing a little over $2 million into our sidewalk program this construction season. This will get us 9.6 miles of sidewalk, which is super exciting. And we are going to be able to improve over 100. So it'll be about 124 ramps to make sure they're ADA compliant, that we are improving those, whether they're cracked or just don't meet the regulations. Those will continue to see significant improvement across the city on our sidewalk program. And then obviously with the Lincoln on the Move, as John was indicating with sales tax, that means our Lincoln on the Move revenue also goes up correspondingly, which is good given the cost and price increases. So we are able to remain on track with all of our projects and what we have programmed and future programming. So it's exciting to see that even though we're seeing that cost increase, we're able to stay and deliver what we had projected and promised at the beginning of the program. So we're right on track with Lincoln on the Move as well. Other than that, I can answer more detailed questions, but
Councilman Beckius?
Yeah. Director Elliott, are you starting to see the cost of any of your goods hit a peak a few months ago and starting to come down at all, or?
not yet.
Okay.
We're hoping that happens soon.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilman Raybold?
Can you tell us a little bit about snow removal? Because I looked at the budget, the numbers way down,
Right.
but I know it's a little bit of the seasonality of your road projects. But how much below the mid-year budget should it?
I don't have exact figures on where we stand at that one. I'll definitely get those to you. We are obviously saving on our winter operations. So what we'll be looking at is, hopefully, that will correlate as we're seeing right now with lower potholes, so we have less expenses there. That does allow us to use resources in other places. So maybe we could be fixing other areas and rather than the winter. The other thing that it will allow us to look into is reinvesting in snow plows and getting all that. The one thing that you will notice in there is our fleet budget. You'll notice there's not much spent out of that. Kind of going back to what we've heard earlier, supply chain, we don't have those snow plows yet. So it's good that we had a light winter because we didn't have the new snow plows. So that's being delayed out a little bit as well. But I can get you the projected savings for winter operations.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Councilwoman Ward?
Thanks. As a follow-up to that, I'm surprised at how many people, I guess not that surprised, are interested about in the snow budget when
Yes.
I'm out and about, where that will go. Not only how much is left over, but how are we going to spend it? So, are you at liberty to say today what?
Yeah, I can tell you what I know. We don't have an actual decision yet.
Okay.
We'll see how this goes. The chances of snow in April are slim to none, but you always hold your
You never
breath
know.
because
You never know.
we are still
I know.
early April.
It is.
But there's so many other areas that we could put it towards, that trying to decide how we get the most value for the community is still, there's probably 100 ideas that my team has thrown out on how we can use that funding, that we've not made any decisions yet.
Okay. Thank you. We'll wait.
Councilwoman Washington?
Thank you. Director Elliott, with the price of diesel, like, off the chart, how does that impact Star Trans' ability to do fare-free and continue that through the end of this budget cycle?
The good thing with the StarTran fleet is we are diversifying. So we actually have fewer diesel buses out on the street, and we are in the process of ordering 11 additional CNG buses. So we are in much better shape than most transit programs across the nation because we are so diversified at this point. Obviously with fare free, and 8% of our revenue for StarTran comes from fares. And with rising costs, that just means we need a larger subsidy from another source, whether that's general fund or something else. So that definitely does, is one factor into that to be considered, but I'm just thankful that we have a very diverse fleet and we are not hit as hard as we could have been.
I could ask one follow-up. You mentioned we have a plan for 11 more CNG buses, and I'm just curious, are you finding them available, or are we really just crossing our fingers because they also are not available?
We are told that they're still on track to get them to us yet this fiscal year. I hope that's true. I hope we got our orders in soon enough so we're at the top of the line. So until they tell us otherwise, I'm going to cautiously hold my breath and have them this fall.
Okay, don't hold your breath too long.
I know.
Any other questions for Director Elliott? Seeing none? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
And again, the kind of things that I think Liz talked about for her department, other departments are seeing as well in terms of supply costs, construction costs. So it's a trend we see across the system. I'll talk briefly just innovations, operations, cybersecurity, lots of good things happening there. You're familiar with a lot of those. You've recently approved, we have the new Oracle payroll and HR system. You recently approved the new Visual Vault permitting and workflow system. And then, of course, CJIS, the criminal justice software system. All these have gotten approvals and they're starting to get underway. So those are all going to, again, create operational efficiencies across the system in order for us to be able to provide better customer service and better output for our departments. In addition, but intentionally less obvious, there's a wide range of system and facility security upgrades that Craig Gifford and the IS team have been working on to make sure that we protect our critical information, our infrastructure, and our operations across the city system. I won't ask Craig to come up and tell you what all those things are, but certainly you can get briefed on those privately when you need to get information about that. But a lot of good things happening there in terms of our ability to continue to be an innovative city and move forward. And then the last thing we want to kind of highlight about some of the trends we've seen over the first 6 months is in terms of public use of city facilities. Certainly during the pandemic, those were down or modified as we took steps then to bring the public safely back into the use of those. They still continue to be under, and some of them have been impacted more than others. I was hoping to ask Wade to come up a little bit and maybe talk a little about what they're seeing in a public facility in terms of the parking system that's been impacted over the first 6 months of the year.
Thanks, John. Well, we've had an opportunity to speak about this individually at a couple of different times, so I'm sure you're familiar a little bit with some of the challenges that we've been facing. The biggest thing is that parking revenues are based on, in general, three things: monthly parking, transient parking, and our on-street metered parking. Pre-pandemic, we had approximately 8,200 monthly parking contracts. That would be looking at month over month, February of 2020 to February of this year. And currently we sit at 5,923. So it's higher than it was this time a year ago, but we're only at 72% of what we were previous to the pandemic. Our transient parking, again, February of 2020 to February of 22. This year we earned $156,053 from transient parking. That's the hourly parking in the garages themselves, as opposed to $228,346 in 2020. So again, we're only at 68.3% of what we were before the pandemic, so the recovery in that area has been slow. We did have a little bit more revenue than we had numbers of vehicles. So over that same time frame, we had 45,323 vehicles park with us in February of this year, as opposed to 69,168 from 2020. So that was only 65%. So the good thing is people are staying slightly longer. So I hope that that is indicative of a positive trend. It's too small to really make any decisions yet, but hopefully it's a positive trend. And our meter revenue is a little bit more difficult to track. The numbers of people using the on-street metered system, a little bit more difficult to track. Anecdotally, we're seeing a great deal of improvement in west part of downtown, so the Haymarket, West Haymarket has really rebounded nicely. That is obviously part of the special events returning, which has been very nice. Our special event revenue, which is not included in this, is pretty much back to normal. Meters, we are at about 65 to 68% of what we were pre-pandemic. And again, while we're seeing really positive numbers in the Haymarket, if you get back over towards 14th Street, 16th Street, those areas over there, you can see that there's no one parking on street over there. Because of the availability of on-street parking, that is depressing the transient parking revenue in the garages as well. One last thing is that I'd like to point out that monthly parking is a little bit more fragile than I'm comfortable with at this point, even though we are seeing some positive trends. We track our daily numbers for the use of monthly park cards, and while we have 5,923 monthly parkers, on a general daily basis, we're seeing fewer than 50% of those actually accessing the garage. So the numbers on a Monday, for example, might be at 2,500. Tuesday, it might dip down a little bit. Wednesday, it would grow again. And I think that's indicative of working from home. I think it's a very clear indication that people are only coming into the office 1, 2, 3 days a week. It also means that downtown businesses have postponed their plans to return to the office. There's many reasons for that. Every time we've begun to get ready to exhale, a new variant has come along. And just about the time that we felt we were getting a handle on all of that, gas prices spiked. So we're subject to exactly the same factors that all the other departments are. And it just seems to be hitting in a rolling nature that has caused businesses downtown to extend their plans to the next quarter, to the fall, to next winter. So the recovery's been very slow. It is happening, but it's been very slow. If you have any questions?
Councilwoman Ward?
Wayne, thanks for being here.
Oh, certainly.
Is there any data nationally or otherwise, I don't know if this is a fair question or not, that is indicating that we'll ever get back to pre-pandemic numbers in downtown cities of our size? And if so, what can we do to plan to get that revenue up again? Because we do depend on your revenue for obviously other things in our budget.
Indeed.
And so what is the industry saying, I guess is my question.
There is very clear data in the industry that indicates whatever point in that argument you'd like to take, I can support it. Exactly.
Well, never mind.
Well, never mind, Wayne.
It's too early.
It is.
It's just too early. Some cities are seeing substantial recovery. Other cities are mired in exactly where they were 2 years ago. It greatly depends on the part of the country that you're in, the climate that you enjoy in that part of the country, and many other factors. We're not a city that's impacted particularly by ride sharing, for example, or car sharing services or any of the other possibilities. We don't have, while we do have scooters and bicycles, it's not in the numbers that you might get in an East Coast city or a West Coast city. So we're not impacted by a lot of micro transit issues. So right now, it's just too early to tell where we're going to go.
Councilwoman Raybould?
Just to follow up on that, I know that there's some projects downtown and
Yes.
that are underway. Did you already talk about those? Or was that
No,
housing?
no, I didn't. As Director Carey pointed out, there are a lot of things happening. And we do anticipate that we're going to be getting, well, there's two major projects. The Campion Housing Project just to our north here, and then the project that's just coming out of the ground on the old Journal Star site. Now that's going to be quite large. So we are anticipating 1,500 to 1,600 new residents in downtown, which will definitely have a positive impact on parking. We've already spoken to the developers in both situations, and they are going to be contracting with parking services for parking spaces. Right now, the numbers are unknown. We're just tapping into that. But we do expect it to have a substantial impact. Now, those are residential parkers, and it probably is going to require us to change a little bit about our business process to accommodate their needs as opposed to the needs of someone who's here from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. But yes, I do expect that to be positive.
So is the Skinny Towers open, and are they filling the residents?
There are 6 people that are 6 units that have moved in. There's only, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact number, but it's in the 30s for the numbers there. They have 100 parking spaces that'll be associated with that building, and right now they're only occupying about 20% of those.
And does that include the offices?
The offices aren't occupied yet, but it doesn't. That number of 100 does include the offices.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thank you, Wade.
That's pretty
And then the last thing we want to lift up certainly is to talk about hiring and turnover challenges, something that we're seeing across all departments. Again, that's a common tale across the community, just like the private sector. We're seeing those same challenges over the first half of the budget year. As you would look through the report, you can see many personnel budgets slightly under, and one of the factors is due to vacancies, due to vacant positions that they have. I know the health department has had difficulty recruiting nurses and dental aides. Chad Blah said building and safety used to have 20 to 30 applicants for a plans examiner position, and in the last 3 rounds have gotten 5 to 8 applicants. Again, we are still finding quality applicants, but like the private sector, we're working hard to overcome those challenges. Interestingly, so you'll see some vacancy and some lower costs in some of those sections. In other cases, like the Star Train, for example, the vacancies actually increase the budget because we need to pay overtime to the drivers that we do have because the system has to keep operating. So there's different influences on different sections, but all the department and the HR team, and now with Barb McIntyre coming on board, we're going to continue to work with that team to make sure that we get new members and to make sure that community services aren't compromised. It is impactful over the first half of the year. We haven't seen any significant service. Well, I don't know what you consider to be significant, but it's impactful to community services, and it's a trend that we need to correct in order to make sure that we're able to continue to provide to the community what they expect. So that will be an ongoing thing that we're all monitoring and making sure that we're staying on top of. Again, plenty more information in the report. Just wanted to lift up some of the trends and issues that we can see as we look through that come up as we do that analysis. Lots more details, lots more information that we can give you. I didn't know if you had any particular questions on that, or we might move into the sort of look ahead portion of the meeting.
John, do you have information available? Is there vacancy savings numbers available, or just theoretically, do you know, or could we get sometime maybe
Yep.
by I don't know if it's by department or just a total number of any vacancy savings?
Absolutely.
I'm not advocating that that's a tool that we use. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know what that would look
Yeah,
like.
and you're absolutely right, because by the end of the year, that will have amounted to something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, we'll absolutely get those.
Any other questions from the council? Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, let's transition ahead about little then. Use the last part of our time to talk a little bit about the future trends and topics, and hopefully get some of your early thoughts, have some conversation about next budget priorities and what we're hearing. Again, going to do the same trick and ask some of our directors to come up and talk with you a little bit. We might ask Dan Marvin to come up. Certainly, we've seen a lot of good work happening in the current budget year on affordable housing, and we expect that to be a continued priority item in the next budget as we talk about that.
There's this
Hey, come on up.
I'll give you a kind of a rundown of what we've been working on just on the affordable housing side. There's lots of other things we're doing, rent, utilities, and other elements, but we've been pretty comprehensive. And the stat that I like is low-income housing tax credit projects. So last year, this body approved 3 low-income housing tax credit projects. One was Middle Creek, one was out on the VA, and the third one was Gatehouse Project. Those totaled 358 units. It's 3 different projects. And to put that in perspective, from 2010 to 2020, the city of Lincoln had 9 total low-income housing tax credit projects for 537 units. So in 1 year, we did, over half the number that were done for the whole previous 10 years, and we did a third of the number of projects. So we've made that a priority. Obviously, this body approved the Affordable Housing Action Plan. We've also been using TIF in creative ways. So we brought Antelope Square, Tabitha, Centerpoint, 25th and Vine, additional projects that use TIF to create levels of rent that are affordable within those units. Not for all of the units, but for a portion of the units inside those projects. We're using the funds that were appropriated last year to help the mission that was spelled out in the Affordable Housing Action Plan. One of those missions is to create a financing tool to help carry forward our goals on affordable housing. And we're working with Community Development Resources to give them a more expanded mission so that they can carry out the goals long-term as a CDFI and use the tools that CDFIs have to help expand the amount of affordable housing that we have in the city. We're doing rehab projects throughout the community, and last year we did 250 first-time home buyer or rehab projects within the community. And I think these are kind of clues as to what we're looking at in 2022. So far, this body has approved 2 tax credit projects already, and we think there's a third one on the way, so that we may be at 3 approved projects. I want to be careful there's a measuring issue here, so when you measure an approved project, you can have problems come along the way. As Liz pointed out, bids can come in above, they can blow up your project, so we're going to measure these throughout the process, but going in, these are projects that have been approved, and we think we can get 3 projects brought before your body this year. We use other general fund items that come through our budget. The TIF admin project funds, those get circled back through, and we've used those for grant applications for projects within SOTO or in other areas to help close the loop on a project that otherwise wouldn't have gotten funding. We did that with the Habitat for Humanity and Lincoln Housing Authority project last year as well. One of the things that we will be doing this year, we'll be doing a rehab program in south of downtown. We think that we can provide up to $15,000 for apartment in south of downtown. As people apply for this, we'll be able to do new windows, new doors. We can do insulation, HVAC systems, other improvements that will really address the energy cost and the comfort and the compliance. And we think that by doing those kinds of investments, we preserve the unit long-term, which is consistent with the action plan. But we also think that we'll bend the curve on the number of calls for service for building and safety to be going to the building because of complaint-based calls that come into building and safety. So those are some of the projects that we're working on, at least in the housing area. Now open it up to any kind of questions you might have.
Councilwoman Ward?
Thank you. So some of us, well, I've been reading about the money coming from the legislature, and so say that that gets passed and signed. So how much is that again, and what are we going to use that for, Dan? Do we know?
Well, I can give you the number. What we think the legislature will pass is a $20 million ARPA funding that would probably be distributed through DED, Department of Economic Development. We don't exactly know where or how those funds can be used, but I think that it's will really have an impact once we get the the rules and regs and how we can use it. And the other was a $10 million. We'll be bringing forward to you something that's taking advantage of LB 866, which was passed a couple of years ago. That provided $6 million to 3 nonprofits in the city of Lincoln. This one is what we describe as a continuation of LB 866 with an additional $10 million. So what that does is provide some financing for owner-occupied within QCT areas of Lincoln, qualified census tracts. And we think that that $10 million will act a lot like the 866 funds that NeighborWorks, Nebraska Housing Resources, and SOTO accessed the last go-round. So between those two, some will be for owner-occupied on a revolving loan fund basis, and then what's exciting is once we understand all the rules and regs for the $20 million, that could have gap-closing capabilities to really accelerate the amount of affordable housing that we do in Lincoln.
Do you have an idea when the rules and regs will come out? Is that usually over the interim, so that or do we know what's in the bill for that?
So I asked Wynn before I came down here if we knew exactly where it was, and I think probably as the legislature closes out, we'll have a meeting with the Department of Economic Development
Great.
to see exactly how this all plays out.
Great, it is a lot. Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Washington?
No, I just, thank you, Councilwoman Ward. Good question. Very curious about that myself.
But I do think there is a role that, whether it's TIF admin or the funds that were provided in last year's budget, in gap closing efforts, because especially with rising costs on construction, but also the other tools that are available, whether it's off-site improvements that are required under that project, or other elements that it's sometimes it's not a large amount of money, but that's sometimes the difference between whether a project is going to happen or it's not going to happen. So, thank you.
Councilman Vecchius?
Director Marvin, who's going to facilitate the South of Downtown TIF Enhancement Dollar Fund?
So from what I understand, we've got a board member here, but what I understand from South of Downtown is they're operating under an interim director, and at some point there may be a continuation of South of Downtown with some back office help and assistance from another nonprofit.
So in short, the city is going to be funding the South of Downtown organization with TIF dollars? Is that what you're saying?
No, the organization's.
The organization's got to stand on its own.
Right.
So
No,
are you talking about the rehab side?
the rehab side.
The rehab,
Are you going to farm that out, or is that going through the city of Lincoln?
we think that we can do much of it in-house through a
Okay.
grant request program that we would draft at the front end. Whether we farm out some of the administration, follow up to make sure that the project is built and constructed in accordance to the way the grant was allowed,
Intended,
we may
sure.
farm that out.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a good clarification, because when you say resources for SOTO, there's SOTO the area and SOTO the
Right.
nonprofit board.
Right.
We're talking
Right.
about SOTO the area.
I'm talking about SOTO, the area.
Yep.
And then the $2 million that was awarded to the South of Downtown area or organization, what's happening with those funds?
That I'll have to check on.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get an update from them.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Director Marvin?
No.
Thanks so much, Director.
I'm going to ask our friend Blazzelli to come back up and talk a little bit about what we anticipate in terms of city growth and infrastructure investment to continue to facilitate that.
Poor Liz.
This is exciting that I get to come talk to you about this, because there's a number of kind of development growth projects that we're looking forward to in this next fiscal year. Probably one of the biggest is going to be the Teresa Street capacity expansion that we're going to do there. Currently, we have a capacity for 27 MGDs, million gallons per day. As you heard David Carey say at the beginning of all of this, the city continues to grow and those applications keep coming in, so we need to expand. We're right at probably the upper levels, 25, 26 MGDs, and so having the growth in our expansion is imminent. So we are looking at expanding for another 17 MGDs, which would bring our total facility capacity up to 44. This expansion will include 2 aeration basins, 2 clarifiers. It'll allow us easier transition for nutrient removal. It does include some ammonia-based aeration control, which is going to be extremely helpful. It also includes an upgrade of non-potable water systems around the facility. All of that we're estimating. We'll see how the cost increases go, but we're looking at about a $38 million project. So it's a really big project. It's something that we really need and are excited to get started on that.
So it went
as
up since
well.
the time I made the slide, or maybe John made a mistake?
No, I think Don and I were talking, and with the current numbers, it did go up since I gave him the information. So I apologize, John. Sorry
Supply
about that.
chain issues.
And Liz, what kind of added lifespan does that add in terms of?
That one, I'm gonna have to go back into my memory. That we do think will get us another, I wanna say 25 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I need to double check
I'll
on
be good.
that. I don't wanna misstate, but I believe it's around 20, 25
Okay,
years. on
we
that.
won't hold you to it. Thank
If I'm terribly far off, I will send you an email and correct that.
Okay.
Councilman McInnes?
Is this going to be over multiple years in the CIP? Or
I
is it all-
believe we have it in 2 years of the CIP, but I'm gonna have to check. 2 years at most.
Okay, so we've already got the plans done? Ready to go to bid?
I believe we're close, not complete,
Okay.
but we are close, yes.
I could go
It is in the first year CIP. I'm hesitating on the second year. We might have put it all in the first year, but potentially second year as well. But it's imminent.
Any other questions?
Sorry, I can jump ahead on a couple of other project ones as well. Biogas on the wastewater facility. We did bring in revenues of 1.942 million. We were estimating 2 million, so we're right on track with that. These revenues go back into paying off the cost it took to build and create this system. We are currently, though, working on a similar system for our landfill. We did go out and do letters of interest. We did get 21 letters of interest. We're combing through those right now. That will help us determine what is the direction we want to take with the landfill biogas. Once we determine what would be the best value and the best for the community, we'll do a formal RFP using some of the information we gained from the letters of interest. So that is a work in process that we're excited to keep moving. And then Lincoln on the Move, I know you guys keep hearing me talk about it, but by the end of the first 3 seasons, we will have completed 30 projects with an estimated total of just under $30 million, $29.9 million on that. In the years 23 through 25, we've identified an additional 11 projects, estimating about $17.5 million. And we're continuing to work on the remaining 19.8 million projects in the years 23, 25. So we continue to work with ACT in making those final determinations for that last grouping. So we are moving ahead, a lot of exciting projects, and I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Councilwoman Raybould?
Can you remind people where they can go and look on the website
thank
to
you
see if
so
their
much.
neighborhood is in this year or next year?
I will take any opportunity I can to push the LTU projects page that has all of LTU projects, aside from the ones that are on the facilities, like the expansion is not going to be on there, but these are the ones out in the public. So all of the Lincoln on the Move street projects, any water mains, those types of projects are on LTU projects page. And it does have we'll have the entire CIP in there, so anything that's currently under construction, being planned, or is currently in design should be on the projects page.
So you go to lincoln.ne.gov and you type project in the search
Yes,
bar.
in the search bar, and it will pop up for you.
Councilwoman Washington?
Thank you.
I realize we're running short, but I really just have to at least put out the marker for the second water source and progress on that.
Yes, so LB 1014 is currently with the governor, so hopefully that will be signed, but that does give us the opportunity to apply for up to $20 million for a second water source. That was something that I testified at the legislature with. We worked closely with Senator Bostar and Senator Wishart, who helped us with that. So hopefully that will get us going. Obviously, we are putting a little bit of aside in each year of the CIP. There is some designated funding for the second water source. Obviously, it's just a little bit. We'll continue for that to grow, but with the compounding effect, we'll get there. Slowly
Thank
but
you.
surely.
I thought of that when John was talking about departments that squirrel away a little bit at a time. I thought of second
That's
water
a
source.
perfect example of that, because it's going to take us a lot of squirreling away over the years to get all of that, but we are starting, and that is in there.
Councilwoman Ward?
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, Director, what is that total cost for the second water supply?
It depends, but if we go to the Missouri, which would be the
Mhm,
most expensive, we're looking at about $800 million in today's funding.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yes.
Councilwoman Raybold?
And is that the one where we tie in with MUD as well?
No, that is just if we would directly connect with the Missouri. If we would do an interconnect, we're looking at probably between 400 and 500 million. So, again, that's all being reviewed. We do have a bid that is out. Well, actually, it closed. We're doing interviews for that consultant to assist us with that. We are building a consortium of public input and elected officials to be part of that as well. So, a lot more discussion on that to be coming.
Any further questions? Thank you so much, Director.
Thank you.
So I can jump forward a couple here. We had put a bullet in, don't have a report on that, but we'll obviously continue our system and our security upgrades, and there are additional things that'll be phased in on that plan. I do want to ask Lynn to maybe come up a little bit and talk about thoughts in terms of community amenities and green spaces that will be part of the conversation in the new budget.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. I think one of the trend lines that we've been talking about that we measure is the street tree pruning cycle. And I think you know that over the last really 16 years, we haven't had any additional arborists, but we've increased the number of street trees that we manage as the community has continued to grow. The street tree pruning cycle now is somewhere above 20 years, and ideally it'd be somewhere down about 12 years. And I do want to say thank you for the $170,000 that was included in this year's operating budget. That will help. We think that's will allow us to prune about 190 trees this year, which will definitely help. A couple of other things that are happening related to trees, and we've talked a little bit about this. The Climate Action Plan identified the goal of replacing street trees on a one-for-one basis. Right now, we have funding to replace about one tree for every 4 that are removed. And so, trend line that obviously we'd like to do something about. There's a lot of interest in trees right now. There's also some federal funding that seems to be coming down the line that we'll be applying for that can help with that. Where those trees get planted also kind of relates to the programs that we have in place right now. We are finding that the street tree voucher program is effective in some neighborhoods, but not very effective in low mod income neighborhoods and in neighborhoods with higher renter occupancy. So I've mentioned that we have hired a community forestry planner who is going to be working directly with some of those targeted neighborhoods to try to get street trees replanted. And we know that that's essentially an equity issue because our older neighborhoods are losing trees over time, and the heat island effect that you hear talked about in other neighborhoods is real here in Lincoln. We are losing trees in our established neighborhoods. As Lincoln continues to grow, we are bringing on new park facilities, new neighborhood parks. We've got 5 neighborhood parks identified to come online during the upcoming biennium. And we've actually got 4 new sections of trails that are planned to come on during the upcoming biennium as well. And so the costs for operating those new facilities will be included in the budget. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Director Johnson? Okay, seeing none. Thanks so much, Director.
The thing we wanted to lift up, and this ties into a lot of what Len was just talking about in terms of resiliency and sustainability and energy savings. Mickey Esposito and the resiliency team, they continue to work hard identifying operational and system opportunities to do work, trying to provide outcomes across multiple values. So not only improving the services, lowering energy costs, increasing safety and community resiliency, cleaner air and water. These actually are not values that compete with each other. You can find ways to do programming that actually accomplishes multiple tasks at the same time. So I know we're short on time, but that's going to continue to be a lens through which all of our departments are analyzing their own programs and their own operations to make sure that they're doing it through a lens of resiliency and sustainability. Fleet and facility improvements in particular are ways that the city, as an operation, can look at what we do in terms of our vehicle purchases, in terms of our buildings, in terms of how we run our operations to find significant savings. So we'll be continuing to do that and having that conversation with you as we move forward and talk about the next budget. Public safety and health, always a priority in budgets. Lots to talk about there in terms of both facilities and personnel. We want to make sure that we continue to have those conversations to make investments to support those public health and safety teams. One of the interesting things that connects kind of the budget that we're in, the previous budget and budget going forward, as well, nobody certainly would wish for a pandemic, but when you get in those crisis situations, it actually creates sort of a stress test opportunity. And we're very happy to say that our teams, our public health and safety teams performed admirably, heroically in these circumstances. But it reveals opportunities where we may be able to do things in a new way and an augmented way to continue to provide even better community outcomes. So when we were hiring additional nurses for health, when we were hiring additional community engagement personnel, epidemiologists, specialists, it not only dealt with those needs during the pandemic, but it reveals opportunities that we may want to have over the budget conversation to find where they can continue to improve those outcomes across the community. In a similar vein, we see our crime rate decreasing. We see our insurance fire rate savings that people see from living in Lincoln, our high cardiac save rate. All those demonstrate police and fire teams are operating at a very high level. We continue to work with them to analyze their personnel and their facility needs, and that will obviously, as it always is, be part of our continuing conversation during the budget to make sure that they have the resources they need to continue that great work. And then certainly, I wanted to put in a bullet there for additional council priorities. I also want to lift up that nothing I have on the list is new or strange to the people in this room, and that, of course, is how it should be. We're working together as a team to listen to what the community wants. These are conversations, these are items that we have continuing conversations about, and that's just indicative of the collaboration that we have. And the fact these items will continue to be things that we want to lift up and work on. We know there will be more. We know you're hearing more and more things that you're interested in. We're happy to talk about anything that you want to lift up now. And we'll obviously be continuing, and we got folks in the room if you have questions or thoughts, but we'll certainly continue to talk and work together over the coming months. I wanted to pause and see if there was anything anybody wanted to lift up at the moment.
Councilman Shob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, thank you. I'd like to say thank you for that. You know, you and I have had conversations about all the items on the list throughout the year, and I appreciate you and your staff being available to me to answer those questions and talk about those ideas that the public is bringing to me as we work on, and that's a year-round thing. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, it's very helpful, and everyone does their own version of that, and we appreciate it too, lifting up issues so that we can start to get them into the mix of how we're doing our work. It's very helpful.
Any other comments? Councilman McGinnis?
I would, thank you. This has been a great report. It's more like what I would like to see.
Good.
Instead
We're
of
getting
all those
closer.
other meetings that we did. So thank you for doing this. I would like to ask Sherry for some breakouts on some things, and one of them would be all the fees that we collect, and maybe past years compared to this year, because part of it is, I think, some of these fees that we collect may be going down or going away, and how do we start to Cablevision and others, and those kind of the trend, what you see, that maybe we can start looking at some long-range planning for some of those. So that'd be something I'd like to look at.
Cablevision.
I
Still
know
have
that.
cable?
Oh, not cable. I call it Cablevision.
Telecommunications.
You have a landline, don't
decades
you?
ago.
Yeah.
Cablevision?
I used to office cable vision.
Once a long, long time ago.
When you were born.
Well, let me just kind of wrap then. I'll just reiterate key takeaways. First half of the budget year, on track. Revenue's on track, expenditures at or below the budgeted amount, so we're happy to report that back. Second half of the fiscal year, as we talked about, we'll continue to monitor the trends and the issues and the concerns that we've seen and report back to you on those. And obviously, parallel track, we'll be working with the council to prepare for the upcoming budget, 22-24. And then just lastly, just kind of a little check-in. So we had our mid-year budget check-in and preview. We'll get you the answers and the things that you've elevated, but continue to have conversations and send us requests for other information that you need. Over the next 2 months, then we'll be doing our work together, individually, small groups, and meetings to kind of pull together the priorities that we've started to lift up and kind of start to gel those more together, helping to feed into the mayor needing to submit a draft budget to council on June 13th in a couple of months. And we hope that, although we provided a broad range of information today, we welcome your feedback so we can continue to fine-tune that and answer any other questions you may have on the report. And we know that we'll get you this follow-up in the upcoming days and weeks. And other than that, just want to say thanks for letting us come down and chat with you a little bit.
Thanks so much. Any final comments from the council? I see none. Thank you so much for you and your team and all that you do.
Sure.
Thank you, thank you.
10 minutes? We have 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes.